Have you ever had one of those days where you're just sitting around doing whatever it is you're doing, and you just happen to remember a certain thing that you did as a kid? Maybe it was a certain movie you really enjoyed, or maybe it was a certain activity that you really liked, and you go and try to find and or do what that thing was. For me, this happened, but with a video game. The video game in question being Dino Crisis. I'm a huge nerd and a fan of a lot of Capcom franchises, from Devil May Cry to Resident Evil to Street Fighter to... I guess it ends there. But what I'm trying to say is, I love Capcom, and most importantly, I love survival horror as a genre. I probably shouldn't even mention that I also adore Silent Hill to death, but before I even played any of these games, I specifically remember there was one game that pretty much introduced me to the survival horror genre, and that was Dino Crisis. For the past few days, I've been playing the original first Dino Crisis for the PS1, and I'm here to tell you all about it and how much I loved it. Let's jump right into it. Let's talk briefly about some of the development of the game before actually talking about the game itself. Dino Crisis began development around late 1996, months after the original Resident Evil 1 had already been published and finished. The game was directed by Shinji Mikami, the same director of Resident Evil 1. However, for Dino Crisis, he stated that he and his team wanted to move away from the fantasy elements of Resident Evil 1 and make something more real. Take that as you will, considering this game has you fighting dinosaurs, which to me is kind of in the same science fiction-y realm of Resident Evil, but I digress. Mikami quotes Jurassic Park and Aliens being his inspiration for the game, which should be a no-brainer. The marketing for the game tagged it as panic horror rather than survival horror, with the enemies being not only quicker but also more intelligent than the zombies of Resident Evil 1, as Mikami describes in an interview for GamePro magazine. Quote, "The dinosaurs in Dino Crisis are very different from zombies. They mainly bite and dash you. We refer to the behavior of wild animals, such as lions and tigers, for the dinosaur AI. These beasts are not afraid of humans or weapons. They simply attack prey in front of them with all their strength. The predatory AI is pretty intense." End quote. On an interview for Edge UK magazine, Mikami says, quote, "I want to create a panic horror game. In the Resident Evil series, the zombies made you feel fear slowly, but in Dino Crisis, the enemies are a lot quicker and they're more intelligent. As soon as you leave a room, you cannot say that danger is gone, because dinosaurs can even open doors. This game is more a matter of constant fright. The engine used for this game was a brand new engine that allegedly wasn't expected to be used for any other video game. This engine allowed them to rely on fully 3D model environments akin to Metal Gear Solid, rather than the pre-rendered backgrounds of the original RE games. Which, as you probably guessed, means the camera system no longer needs to be fully static, as the camera can freely move around to follow the player character, which it does and feels amazing. This truly is one of the best things one can do when using a fixed camera system. Make it be dynamic and not fully static. It gives the game a more cinematic feeling while not taking control away from the player to make it cinematic, as well as easier changes of camera angles. However, the limitations of the PS1 hardware were there, and while Mikami was conscious that he could do better with the next generation of PlayStation, with the PS2 around the corner, they did have to give up on a few elements they wanted to implement due to hardware, like a portion of the game that would have taken place in a jungle environment. The game would release on 1999 alongside Resident Evil 3, with ports released for the Dreamcast and PC alongside Code Veronica the following year. And now that we have some of the development history out of the way, let's talk about the game itself. The game begins with a sort of mission briefing given to the player. One of your colleagues has infiltrated a laboratory as a scientist and gives you information on your target, Dr. Kirk, a scientist that proposes a method of clean energy who staged his own death. Your mission is to secure Dr. Kirk and bring him back safely. Pretty as a mission, just infiltrate and get out. The opening of the game is reminiscent of Resident Evil in the sense that you're a team of specialized agents going in to investigate weird happenings on a specific location. Oh, and also the fact that one of your teammates gets chomped to death. You'll never hear from this guy ever again. But this gives you a little bit of a teaser for what's to come. You're going to be playing as Regina, a member of a specialized espionage organization, alongside two other members, Rick and Gale. Well, technically three, but you know. Now that I think about it, a lot of survival horror games have mostly female main characters. Not that I'm complaining, I think they're badass, and Regina sure has to be one of my favorites simply based on her personality.
That's disgusting.
The first few areas are pretty good at letting you get used to the controls. You can do most things that you'd be able to do in Resident Evil, including a quick turnaround button, which is very useful, as well as being able to actually move while aiming, which honestly is one of the best things. You can't run, but you can at least move, and I kind of really appreciate that. I gotta say, a little too many cutscenes for my taste in the beginning. When I'm playing these sorts of games, I generally like that most of them give you a lot of freedom to do whatever without taking away too much control from you. But for these starting areas, there's quite a number of these short cutscenes. For our first objective, we're gonna have to restore the power so that our buddy Rick can hack into the mainframe. We'll be introduced to a puzzle that's gonna be pretty common, and it's pretty fun to do. Nothing too hard, just gotta make sure the batteries are on the same position as the levers. Okay, now that's done, and... Ooh, well, that doesn't sound too good. Our buddy Gale is nowhere to be seen, and we'll be introduced to our very first dinosaur. No time to think about it though, unless you want to be thrown around like a ragdoll, it's time to move it. Mikami was not kidding when he said these enemies are much quicker. One of the most terrifying things about this game is running away from a dinosaur and not only hearing the footsteps behind you, but also being able to see how it's starting to gain on you due to the camera angle. Luckily, you can go to the other room very easily. Everyone knows that enemies can actually go to other rooms. Just imagine being a little kid or a teenager, and having played countless times Resident Evil 1 and or 2, thinking that you know exactly what you're getting into when playing Dino Crisis, and having this shit happening to you. You have no idea how insane it feels. Once something like this happens, not only do you never feel safe on any room, but you're also basically on square one. It's like you don't even know the mechanics of the game anymore. After that intense panic attack, the dinosaur will finally leave you alone, and you can enter the facility. This is where you're gonna spend most of the game, so better get used to the map. Once you play through a lot of it, it's easy to memorize, and I honestly really like it. It's not too big. There's a few shortcuts that are very useful in the form of vents that you can climb up, and this is actually required to get past the first area. You're gonna be meeting Rick on the control room and get to your next objective. Something that this game does pretty well is that it actually marks on your map where you need to go next, so that you're not entirely lost, as well as any locked doors so that you don't just interact with everything. Although there are quite a few sections of the game where you'll need to explore without an objective, which can be quite confusing, and I've personally needed a few guides for a few sections where I completely forgot what I was even supposed to do. It would have been really useful if each area actually had a name so that you could navigate easier and not even need the objective marker on your map. But the way it works is fine as it is, albeit a bit confusing due to me not remembering what the areas were in the map. After this, you'll encounter the very first save room with that iconic, comforting save room music. Gotta say, the atmosphere of this game is incredible, from the save room music to the iconic music you'll be hearing throughout the initial sections of the game, to the music you'll be hearing whenever you get chased by enemies. Although it does kinda sound like someone just kinda hit their head on the keyboard and battery to make it, it still kind of evokes a certain feeling of chaos and panic that translates pretty well whenever you're carefully walking around and suddenly a dinosaur enters the room. There's a few things to do in the very first save room. You can turn on the power to access notes on the computer, as well as a safe that you can access a little later on with a code. And of course you can save your game here, although it's quite weird how it works. At first I thought I could save my game by using the computer, but in reality you just have to exit the room to save the game. I don't know why they couldn't just add a typewriter alternative to save your game. I mean, the computer is right there. This way is kind of weird, but it's not like it doesn't work. We're gonna have to go upstairs for now, where we'll encounter our very first DDK, the digital disc key. This will be a recurring quote-unquote puzzle across the game. You're gonna need a code and an input disc to open these doors, each one with a specific letter attached to it. Once you have both, you're gonna be met with a code from which we'll have to take out the letters on the key area to open the door. This will start off easy, like this, and will get way more complicated as it goes on, with the DDK method branching off into two more methods, where in one of them letters are replaced by numbers, and in another, numbers will actually mean a whole column from which you'll have to take out the letters. This was actually a pretty cool idea, and I personally really liked it, although I would have liked it more if I needed only one disc to open doors, but I never felt like the maps were so big that going around fetching items was a bother, and you'll come across items as you progress through the game naturally quite a lot. So it's just something that I would have liked it if it was more convenient, because I'm just lazy. The whole DDK puzzle, combined with the fact that you have no file option, meaning the letters and maps or notes that you come across will not be carried around, meant that I had to actually whip out a notepad and write down important information that I couldn't carry around so that I could use it later. I have to say, while it is super convenient in games to carry around all the files and have that option, and I actually would have preferred it if Dino Crisis had that, having to actually write down information IRL is a good way to kind of keep you engaged. Every time I came across something that needed a password or a new puzzle, I'd whip out the information I needed to solve it. It feels pretty fun and rewarding. Of course, the DDKs are not the only puzzles in the game. There's a variety of different puzzles that are required and some that are optional, from a puzzle where you need to put together pieces to form a picture, to a crane game where you need to move around boxes, which is actually more difficult than it sounds considering it's laid out as a card game of sorts, where you have not only limited options but also limited moves, which actually makes you have to think before you just start moving around things. There's also optional puzzles for certain sections of the game. Throughout the game, you'll have to choose different branching paths. These won't have any major impact on the story as they will play out mostly the same, and you'll reach mostly the same outcomes, but they will differ in how you get there, with Gale's being mostly combat oriented and quicker, and Rick's being a little slower but saving up tons of resources due to being puzzle oriented. Rick's optional puzzles are pretty fun to do, with one of them being so challenging near the end that I had to use a notepad to help me get through it. And that's not the only thing you're gonna have to write down. Since there's no file option, every time you come across certain codes or important information, you better write that shit down or memorize it because you'll eventually need it at some point. Most of the information that you will need are certain codes and ID registration numbers of certain scientists that you can come across. This information is important because of the unique mechanic of Dino Crisis, where you can rewrite information on an ID card by using the fingerprints of scientists and their registration numbers to grant you different levels of access to the facility and its laboratories. I loved all this. Having to actually use my head, memorize places, backtrack to use keys and codes in different places, and having to actually write down information meant that I was always engaged on not only the gameplay, but also what my objective was. Even when I had no objective and I had to explore until something triggered, I was engaged enough to know what rooms I had visited and which ones I hadn't. So combat is not everything you'll be doing in Dino Crisis. And speaking of combat, let's talk a bit about your different defensive options as well as the foes you'll be facing in the game. As you probably already know, you'll be facing dinosaurs in this game. The main dinosaur you'll be facing is the Velociraptor, which acts as the basic enemy of this game. They're fast, they're strong, and they can mess you up if you're not careful or if there's more than one. Your handgun will not do much damage to these guys at first, but you can get certain upgrades to allow your gun to use stronger ammunition and have a higher chance of scoring a critical hit, which will knock down enemies. Even then, I'd advise to not even bother with these guys, as I pretty easily could dash past them, only having trouble in later sections where the hallways become almost claustrophobic and you can't squeeze past many enemies. The second enemy you'll encounter is a flying Pterosaur that you will encounter first on a scripted event where it picks Regina up and throws her against a wall, showing you what the enemy is capable of. This will also cause you to drop your gun, something that can happen during gameplay when enemies grab you, which adds to the whole panic of encountering enemies, especially in groups. I never had much trouble with these guys, as they mostly will fly around and will glide down to try and grab you, but if you just keep running and don't run straight ahead, you'll be fine. The encounter also introduces you to the danger mechanic. Throughout the game, there will be certain sort of quick time events where a danger text will show up, meaning that you have to mash every button in your controller to escape successfully from danger. These sections, as well as any other section where a dinosaur is chasing you, will have a super intense background music that will really get your blood pumping. At least that's what it did to me. Even if I know I can successfully escape the situation, I just can't help but feel a sudden panic due to how jump scary a lot of these encounters can be. Especially when a dinosaur follows you into another room, which they do a lot. The third enemy you'll encounter is the Blue Raptor. This enemy is a bigger, more powerful version of the Velociraptor and one of the strongest, if not the strongest enemy of the game. Definitely a foe you don't want to underestimate, so you better be ready to face them or just avoid them altogether like I did. The fourth enemy is another strong one, the Therizinosaurus. You'll mostly encounter these guys in pairs and they're absolutely devastating, even being able to completely one-shot you and block your path with their chunky bodies. These sorts of situations will have you make decisions quickly. If you want to survive, will you risk getting damage as you get through, or will you stay and fight them? They have pretty high resistance against anything, and the best option to swiftly deal with them is to use darts, either tranquilizers or poison darts. Forget about using your handgun for these guys, it's all about your other options, the shotgun and the grenade launcher, both having different upgrades and ammo types. The shotgun has 2 upgrades you can get. One of them upgrades your shotgun to be more powerful, but will have more recoil and be slower as a result, which you can neutralize with the next upgrade, which is the shotgun stock. The grenade launcher has 1 upgrade, which allows you to put up to 3 grenades without needing to reload, which is incredibly useful and almost necessary, I think. There's also different ammo types, of course, for each gun. The shotgun has the most ammo types, being able to fire not only shells, called bullets in the game for some reason, but also darts, both tranquilizer darts that can range from small to medium to large, requiring different numbers of shots before they make an effect, and lasting different amounts of time. And the poison darts that take care of the enemy in 1 hit pretty much. Very useful, although I literally only found a single poison dart in my entire playthrough. The grenade launcher has regular grenades as well as heat grenades that will do a ton of damage. I personally found myself using the darts for most of the game. As much as I enjoy putting lead on these dinosaurs' faces, the darts just take care of the problem super quickly, and even if you do kill enemies, it doesn't really matter since they respawn most of the time, so you're never truly out of the woods even if you completely clear rooms. So saving up ammunition for only the absolutely necessary moments is essential in this game, especially considering there's not a lot of ammunition around, so you better save up. Fortunately, fighting or evading is not the only way you can avoid getting killed in the game, as the environment itself can be used to avoid fights. Throughout the areas in the game, there will be a lot of these laser walls that dinosaurs cannot get through. They're usually pretty easy to turn on and off, although you'll have to restore the power or have Rick allow you to use them before you can turn them off. But whenever there's more than one enemy in an area, or you don't really feel like fighting, you can just go behind one of these and just say goodbye to that dinosaur chasing you, as it will be trapped on the other side. It's extremely fun to do this and very rewarding, as it not only saves resources but will also allow you to get through certain areas much easier, as the dinosaurs won't bother you. All this adds a nice level of decision making whenever you're picking up items or opening supply boxes, as you decide what you want to take with you and what you're going to be leaving behind. These supply boxes are your only means of managing your inventory, as there is no item box or any way for you to drop items in this game unless you use them. You'll open up these supply boxes through plugs that you can find. Each box requiring different numbers of plugs and each one granting you different resources, with green giving you mostly health stuff, red ammunition, and yellow a mixture of both. Let's talk a bit about these because this is gonna get a bit confusing, so bear with me. So you know how in Resident Evil and Silent Hill, health items are pretty basic? You get a couple of herbs or energy drinks to recover health. Pretty simple stuff, right? Well, Dino Crisis is a bit more complicated than that. You have your regular good old medkits, ranging from small to medium to large, granting you different types of healing, with small medkits being almost useless as they recover very little health, and medium medkits being your standard healing item, healing all of your health, and large ones being the most useful since they heal and stop your bleeding. And yes, you can bleed in the game. When enemies attack you, not only will you lose health, but you will also bleed. This will make it not only easier for enemies to track you down, I think, due to the scent of blood, but also will lower your health even if you heal. To cure this, you need to use hemostats, which stop bleeding but don't heal you. Now you see why those large medkits can be so useful. There's no real way to know how much health you have aside from Regina's animation, which gives you a visual indicator of her health. If she's grabbing her side and limping, then you've got low health. Otherwise, you're generally fine. There's also resuscitations, which will grant you basically free continues, as you'll respawn in the last room before you died with your health fully restored. Once you don't have any of these, the continues are pretty much the same, but you only get 5 and no healing. Okay, so this is where it starts to get a little more complicated again. Aside from healing items, you get a lot of items that can be useful for mixing. Items like intensifiers, multipliers, anesthetic aids, recovery aids, etc. These items will grant you things like being able to multiply certain ammunition types or healing items, being able to intensify the power of healing items, giving them a plus sign, making them more powerful or making them sort of level up, or create new items altogether. I gotta say, this does add quite a lot of depth to the gameplay. If you're running low on resources or you need a certain type of resource, you can just go to the supply boxes to get what you need, and you can just craft it yourself. Sometimes you can even find these resources just lying around. If you only have anesthetic darts that are low level, you can use items to make it stronger and multiply their quantity. The same with medkits, or if you need to stop your bleeding, you can just create a hemostat. It's not entirely clear which items you have to mix to get what, which is what I needed certain guides for. You only get to see the item you'll get before you choose yes to mix both items. The UI will also tell you the volume and level of the item you'll get, meaning how strong it will be and what the quantity will be. It could have been done easier, like telling you do you want to mix A and B to get C, instead of just asking you if you want to mix the items all together without telling you anything else, but the way it works is, it's alright, and you can figure it out yourself. Most of the times I only ever used items like anesthetic aids, intensifiers, and or multipliers to increase the potency of items I already had. Needless to say, I loved this aspect of the game, though I was quite sad that this is the only way you get to manage your inventory, seeing as you don't have any other means of exchanging items as the universal box is nowhere to be seen in the game. I've encountered situations where I really needed a specific type of item that was on the floor, but I couldn't pick it up due to my inventory being full, which was a huge bummer. I suppose this is time to talk about the biggest, baddest dinosaur of all in the game, and the only boss of the game for that matter. Your first encounter with this beast will be on the chief's room on the second floor, where you will unlock a certain safe by using the codes in the keys the scientist gives you and the key you encounter in the first safe room. After you get the items in there and you attempt to leave, the Tyrannosaurus will make its first appearance. Easily one of the most scariest, panic-inducing, and hardest fights. Timing is of the essence when fighting the Tyrannosaurus. You don't want its mouth to get anywhere close to you, as a single hit will kill you, as it would in real life of course. You want to shoot him as he's approaching with his mouth open, which will cause him to stagger. That's pretty much all you have to do. However, the different circumstances in which you fight him and how good you can control your character will dictate how the fight goes. You can end the fight in around 4 shots with the shotgun and the most powerful ammo, as well as the grenade launcher. I haven't tried poison or anesthetic darts, but I would still recommend shells or grenades. The heat grenades can end the fight in only 3 rounds. Let's talk a bit about the plot of the game and its characters. This is fairly easy to follow, just your regular good old survival horror plot. Crazy scientist has a crazy experiment, group of specialists are sent to investigate, and everything goes to shit. Like I said in the beginning, you're sent in to search and recover Dr. Kirk. Ever since the start, everything seems wrong, with guards missing and scientists being nowhere to be seen, or completely dead and ripped apart. The answer comes pretty soon into the game, with the first dinosaur encounter taking place like 5 minutes after starting the game. Throughout your journey, you'll come across more information about the facilities as well as what is actually going on. One of the first decisions of the game is whether or not you want to go search for Kirk, who has been spotted running around the cameras, or help your friend who infiltrated earlier as a scientist. And since I chose the latter, I met up with Tom, who is super injured and pretty much dying, and after some puzzling around and getting him to safety, he unfortunately meets his demise, although in the most badass way possible.
Rick, watch out! Chew on this!
And now that I'm talking about it, I'll take the chance to say just how good the voice acting actually is in the game. It's no incredible performance, but it's way better than the type of voice acting you'd hear in Resident Evil or Silent Hill at the time. Each character talks and handles themselves in a very specific way that it lets you know exactly what kind of personality and character they are without even telling you their names. The only characters who don't really matter are the dying scientists who give you items, of which the place is full of. This particular one is pretty memorable, but only due to the fact that the puzzle is pretty tough and required me to write down the answers in a notepad, as well as the fact that you can trap and poison a dinosaur in the room, which is awesome. And speaking of scientists, let's get to Dr. Kirk. You'll find Dr. Kirk after a section where you enter his secret lab and escape before the entire room enters lockdown. And man, don't worry, we'll get to talk about Kirk soon. However, in this part of the story, once you've gotten a hold of Kirk, it's time to get out before things get worse. So you gotta activate the antenna and then go call for evac. This is the second encounter with the T-Rex that you'll find yourself in, and it is hard as balls, let me tell you what. I've died more times than I could count with this fight, it's ridiculous. Once the evac finally comes, it seems like it's the end of the game, right? This cutscene is pretty deceiving, but no, this isn't the end. Not yet at least, as the T-Rex destroys the helicopter and forces you to escape underground and find an alternative escape route, losing Kirk in the chaos as the T-Rex attacks. This is where you encounter the final dinosaur species, which I didn't bother to mention because they're so insignificant. They're little dinosaurs that appear in groups and will mostly just do very low damage and get in your way, more of a nuisance than a threat. This entire section revolves around trying to restore power to the facilities and find an alternative escape route while Gale searches for Kirk. There's an underground port that you can use to escape, but it's blocked by some weird energy vortex similar to the one seen earlier in the game in Kirk's lab. This forces you to find another way, and as you explore the area of the third energy experiment, you'll encounter Kirk once again. Fortunately, Gale saves you from Kirk painting the walls with your brains, and this is the scene where Kirk explains everything, basically telling you that he managed to create a device that can exchange pockets of time with each other, which explains how the dinosaurs got here and explains those energy vortex. And this is where the voice actor really shines. Kirk is the most asshole character you can encounter, and yet he's one of the best in the game in my opinion, simply due to his personality and the way he speaks.
Years ago, I thought that the energy had the ability to transfer selective space to an alternate time-space continuum. But I was incorrect. The space was not transferred, it was exchanged. To put it in terms that even you can understand, third energy has the ability to replace a pocket in space with one from a different time.
What?
Yes, I came to these conclusions following this evening's final experiment. You've seen the effects yourself. Those beasts were occupying the space this facility is located on almost 65 million years ago.
Right. So that's how those dinosaurs appeared in our time.
Precisely. And that is what I have done.
Enough. Only one thing matters at this point. Your grand invention is blocking our escape.
You need to destroy the vortex. The only way to do that is to allow the generator's third energy levels to overload.
This is where yet another decision comes into play. Kirk explains how to put a stop to this experiment to let you escape. For this you're going to need a stabilizer and an initializer. You can either create it yourself by looking around for parts, or simply backtrack a whole entire area and get it and run back. I did the latter since it's faster, and once you do, this is the end of the game. You'll get the final choice in the form of a decision to either hunt down Kirk, who has escaped, or just escape yourselves and let him go. You'd think each decision counts for a different ending, but there's actually 4 endings, with the game only counting 3. In one of the endings, you follow Kirk alongside Gale. This ending reveals the true purpose of the mission, which wasn't to just get Kirk back, but to get his experiment information so that your government could recreate it and use it themselves. After Gale explains this, he dies, and you have to escape without him through the underground port. The T-Rex is not letting you go that easily, so you have to fight him one last time. And this has got to be one of the best finishes to an antagonist I've seen on any survival horror game.
End of the line for you, handsome. You're extinct!
Unfortunately, this is the only ending where Regina actually deals the final blow. There's 2 different endings aside from this. In one of them, you go to an underground heliport before getting to Kirk. This ending allows Gale to live, and you all escape to freedom, but you don't get to know the conversation that Gale was having with Kirk. Once again, you'll have to battle the T-Rex, this time through a giant hallway, and you'll be escaping through the helicopter with Rick dealing the final blow this time. The next ending is pretty much the same, though this time you simply knock Gale out and go to the heliport, where you'll find Kirk attempting to escape. Yeah, that was badass. This ending is identical to the last one except for that scene, and the fact that you don't have to do that much backtracking since you have to go straight to the heliport and escape from there. There's one more ending that I didn't get. In this ending you escape with a knocked out Gale through the underground port, but leaving Kirk behind. Without a guide, I wouldn't have been able to get the best ending in my opinion, which is the one where you all escape through the heliport. I didn't even know that the heliport existed since it's blocked off in an area that you don't really have access to at all until the end of the game, and you can forget about super easily. After finishing the game, you get a cool end result screen detailing the status of everyone in the mission and the objective, as well as your time and endings acquired. You also get some pretty cool unlockables after finishing the game, the unlockables being 2 new skins for Regina, and a final one after getting at least 2 endings, which is the funniest one, turning every weapon in the game into prehistoric versions of themselves. You also get a similar game mode to Mercenaries on RE3. In this game mode, you pretty much have to clear rooms of dinosaurs under a time limit. Pretty basic, that's pretty much it, but hey, it's fun, and it's an extra game mode, so I'm not complaining. I left out some parts of the story, but made sure to include the key parts of it, as well as mentioning just how entertaining and good the characters are. I don't want to explain the entire story and events of the game step by step, since it's not really the focus, and also because I don't want to ruin it for anyone that hasn't played this yet. So there's a couple more surprises that if you didn't play the game, you'll encounter that I didn't talk about here. And, well, that's Dino Crisis. An intense, fun, atmospheric, and action-filled panic horror adventure. The entire game is not very long, easily being able to be finished in like 3 hours if you know what you're doing, but each step of it is just so incredibly solid or amazing. The gunplay is solid, the controls feel good, although it can be a little hard to get the first time around. The atmosphere is simply incredibly good, and the characters are great, they're really fun. Really, I feel like it's a shame Dino Crisis isn't getting the remake treatment Capcom is giving to Resident Evil. If they remade Dino Crisis in the exact same way they did the first remake of Resident Evil, I think we'd have a fantastic game on our hands. I think it would be incredibly successful. Honestly, I would recommend playing Dino Crisis if you didn't play it in a while or haven't played it ever. It's a very fun, solid action horror experience, and you will not be disappointed at all, from the nature of the enemies making you feel constantly in danger since they can enter rooms pretty much anywhere, from the music and the general atmosphere. The fact that Dino Crisis is a little more action oriented doesn't mean it's any less scary, especially in instances where the enemy itself is what adds to a scary situation. I don't want to make this video any longer than it already is, so I guess those are my final thoughts on Dino Crisis. Very happy and glad I played through it. It was a very fun and great experience. I hear Dino Crisis 2 is more action oriented and drops the whole horror atmosphere as well as the puzzles. Maybe I'll check it out sometime later, but as for this video, this is where I'll be ending it. As always, please remember to check out my links in the description since I am mainly an artist and it would really help me out if you followed me. Having said that, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.